Hello, Augustana. Welcome to our weekly Bible study. As we take a look at the preaching text for this Sunday from Numbers chapter 14, verses 1 through 10, I'm beginning a sermon series, The God I Know, and this is the first of that four-part sermon series, The God of Transitions. And this is a transition text, just to set a little bit more of the context from Numbers 14. The people of Israel were set free from bondage to slavery in Egypt. They were there for around 400 years. And then they actually wander in the wilderness for another 40 years because of their sin, and that's a whole other story. But it was a struggle for them. It happened on Mount Sinai with the golden calf, their disobedience to God. God decides to punish them. And finally now they're on the verge of crossing over into the promised land. And Moses sends some spies into the land to check things out. He picks a representative from each of the 12 tribes of Israel to go in, to check things out, to spy out the land. And when they come back and give their report, 10 of the spies bring back a negative report. And two of the spies, Joshua and Caleb, bring back a positive report, and they believe that God is with them and that God will help them to enter and conquer the land. And that brings us to our reading for today in chapter 14. The people of God are gathered as a congregation, and they raise a loud cry, and the people wept that night, and all the Israelites complained against Moses and Aaron. The whole congregation said to them, "Would that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would that we have died in this wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us into this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones will become booty. Would it not be better for us to go back to Egypt?" So they said to one another, "Let us choose a captain and go back to Egypt." It's so striking what's happening here, that after all God's people have been through literally for over the last 400 years, and they're finally set free from slavery, and God is leading them to the promised land, and they're on the verge of entering into that land, and they're afraid. It's a time of huge transition for them, and all they want to do is go back to Egypt, go back to what is familiar, go back to living in slavery and in fear, and because it was comfortable. They were afraid of what was going to happen next. They were afraid of whether or not they would be able to enter the land and conquer the land and occupy the land. And Moses and Aaron fall on their knees before God, and they ask for God's help. And Joshua and Caleb say that the land is a good land, and if the Lord is pleased with us, he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land flowing with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not fear the people of the land, for they are no more than bread for us. Their protection is removed for them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them. And what Caleb and Joshua and Moses and Aaron are basically saying is, you need to trust God here. Anytime you're in transition, anytime you're going into a new territory, and that certainly applies for our lives. It applies to Augustana right now, as we are in this time of transition, as we are moving forward, as we come to the end of 15 months of COVID and a pandemic. There's a lot that's unknown ahead of us, and that's partly why I picked this text for this Sunday, was for us to be reminded that as we sit on the verge of moving into something new, something different, something that we don't know about or what's going to happen, the promise of God is still there, that God will be with us, that God will lead us, and that we need not be afraid, even though we don't know what it is. It is, as I say in my sermon title, it's faithful uncertainty. We're uncertain about what it's going to be, but we trust God, and we remain faithful to God and to God's leading hand, knowing that God is always faithful to us, and that the glory of God, the presence of God, will be leading and guiding us. So I invite you to spend a little time reading the text. read a little bit more around this story, both before and after chapter 14, to hear what's going on, because it's really interesting. It's an interesting time in the life of Israel as they're transitioning from wandering in the wilderness, which is a huge metaphor for all of us, into that promised land, which is another metaphor for us, and God is the one leading the way. So thanks for listening, and thanks for immersing yourself in the Bible, this preaching text for this Sunday, and I'll look forward to seeing you in worship on Sunday. Thanks, Augustana.